been joining us for tonight, and welcome back to everybody who's a regular, and welcome to the new people. Thanks for coming. Over to you.
So the way that I work best is if I get lots of questions from you, so speak up as you have questions. And every time I give this talk, it goes differently because it's based on what the audience is interested in. So it's what you want is what you get. How many of you spend a significant amount of your time testing? Okay. And how many of you spend a significant amount of time doing development? Anyone spend a significant amount of time doing project management, program management, and other kinds of management? How many of you spend a significant amount of time doing other stuff than what I was saying? What kind of other stuff?
Just the day-to-day things that get in the way of testing. So answering emails or answering questions or dealing with a schedule.
I spent time writing and revising requirements, as well as sort of doing, I guess, some amount of systems engineering, making sure that everyone's sort of all on the same page with things.
Okay. I spent a lot of time managing our environment.
By environment, you mean the servers and
Not just my personal workspace, but the QA environment and sometimes production.
Some machines and all that.
Yeah.
Now, if you think about manual versus automated testing, whatever that means to you, I'm not trying to get the one true definition of that.
Yes.
How many would say you spend all of your time doing manual testing and no automated testing? How many do about half and half? How many try to do 100% automated testing? Again, for scripted testing versus exploratory testing. Again, whatever that means to you. How many would say you do 100% scripted testing? And how many of you are about 50-50? And 100% exploratory. As you think about the test automation that maintain, picking up from someone else, test scripts that you've written, whether they're automated or manual, or some combination, or even test charters and other collateral like that. What are some of the problems that you found as you try to use these and maintain them and create them?
I think you said it, maintain them.
What's specifically around maintenance of the problem?
Getting the approval to have time for me to maintain them. We, our group supports about 40 applications, and we don't have time, unfortunately, to maintain one of our scripts.
So they'll change the program and then.
Also keeping up with it, really.
Yeah,
Just
keeping up with the
with
changes
it.
and making sure the changes are represented in the script.
Yeah.
So when you don't get to approval or you don't keep up with the scripts, what happens if your testing history against these out-of-date scripts?
This slows down, especially someone who isn't familiar with the script, because it's like, it failed. Like, no, it's not failed, it changed, it hasn't been updated yet. Don't worry about it.
So they kind of maintain as part of the testing then?
Yes.
What other problems?
I think one of the challenges, it depends on the environment, is legitimacy. Just because you can automate it doesn't necessarily mean that the platform or the tool or the data that you used is going to be bought off by the development team or the business stakeholders and how you found it and whether it needs to be actionable. For instance, if I performance test on a 1/6 scale production environment, how much of that will translate to something that an operational owner may take action on? So that's always something to be negotiated and worked.
Right, so how valid are the results of the testing?
Right.
Anything else? Yeah.
How useful is the software you're using? Like for our manual test cases, we're using Excel right now. There has to be something better out there that's more streamlined that would be faster uptake.
For your test case management? Yeah. What other problems do you see?
Let's see, don't fix the bug, fix the test.
Yeah, so there's a confidence issue when you find a bug, whether it's actually a product issue or a test issue.
Yeah, especially when it's 1 out of like 10,000 test cases. What goes wrong? Loud too.
Sounds a lot like the results validity, like the resulting failed test is a valid problem, and then trying to explain that.
Yeah.
Okay.
As if you're hired to be able to explain. In some cases, you're not.
And especially if you're not keeping up with your maintenance, you're not even sure if it's a problem with them.
Yeah.
They're not.
Right, so it takes a while, you get a failure, you have to figure out, is it the test issue, is it the product issue?
Is it a missing requirement?
Is it, yeah.
Is it a new requirement?
What changed and why did it change and was it okay that it changed and how do you need to change things to reflect that change? What other issues do you see? So all of these I've run into, definitely in the testing I've done, the teams I've worked with. And the approach to writing tests, whether they're automated or manual, that I'll talk about tonight, initially came out of being on a team where we had, everything was changing all the time. I was working on a brand new product, working on a brand new platform, working on what at the time was supposed to be a brand new OS. We didn't know if we would ever ship, or if we did ship, when that would be. And we had an executive sponsor who was telling us, no, you're a brand new product. You have no test case legacy. You have no product legacy. There's no reason you can't automate 110% of your testing. And the test manager turns to me and asks, can we do that? And I turned to him and said, well, I don't know, but he thinks we can, so we need to figure out something that satisfies whatever he's really asking for. And so what I did was part of the culture on the team and at Microsoft is we support many, many customers, many, many languages, many, many environments for many, many years. So test automation is seen as one solution to that problem. How do you have a product where the team has moved on 3 or 4 releases later, we still need to do security patches, we still need to do hotfixes for important customers. How do we validate that we're not screwing anything else up as we fix these things, especially when it's the people doing the development and the testing of the fixes? It may not be the development team or the test team, but the engineering team that worked on it initially. And automation is seen as a solution to this. So I was looking at how do we keep maintenance down? How do we keep, since I know everything is going to change, and over the course of that project, the UI changed in minor ways that would still break a lot of automation multiple times. It changed in major ways, probably 4 or 5 times over the 4 years that I worked on the product. The architecture of the product completely changed multiple times. there were a couple months, I think at least once, where the development team was doing a complete re-architecture of portions of the product. We all started calling it the spine transplant because they're kind of picking up just these core parts and sticking a different one in. How do we keep testing it when there's not actually a product to test? How can we test? How do we keep up with all those meetings? It was very clear to me that if we went the way that the team had started, and that at that point, a lot of teams at Microsoft were doing very detailed scripted automation where the scripts knew the gory details of how to find things in the UI and how to go and click and what actions needed to happen in the sequence. Even if we pulled some of that stuff out into helpers, there's still a lot of detail in the test cases that every test case was going to be updated on a regular basis. And there's no way that we could spend all of our time doing these because we have, in the end, 4 years of new features to automate, in addition to keeping all the existing things running. We wanted to be able to say, we definitely wanted to have the confidence in our test cases. When a test failed, it was a product issue, not a test issue. I wanted to keep every change that might happen to one single place. And we really wanted to not spend all of our time writing these scripted tests. Yeah.
Just a quick terminological question, because I know that in the community, a lot of arguments get started about whether test cases are good or bad, and they end up being arguments about, well, that's not what I mean by a test case. So when you say test case, how specific are you being?
Generally, I mean a script. It's manual, a set of steps to follow with some description of what you expect to happen. If it's automated, it's in a script of a collection of lines of code that for this particular action. So sometimes it might be very specific of when I check this box, the UI reacts in this particular way. Other times it might be more generic about testing this kind of in any scenario. And part of what we wanted to do, what I really wanted to drive home, and what I found to be the biggest outcome of the test framework, that while we solved a lot of the problems of how do we keep all these changes in one place and how do we keep maintenance costs low, the biggest thing that came out of this was how do we make the intent of the test case clear? How do we write a test in terms of semantics, where and sometimes the test, the intent of the test, might actually be testing low-level UI details. This team, we were writing a lot of custom controls to do things because the UI framework that we were building on, which was itself being built, didn't have, like, for a lot of the product, there were even some basic things like tree view controls there. Other times, the intent of the test was testing these high-level scenarios. We also knew that there were going to be many, many ways to do different actions. Each particular implementation would come online at different points in time, and we didn't want to have to figure out what test do I now need to write for this new action, new way to do an action. So, for example, if you think of something like Word, you can create a new document using a menu. You can navigate the menus with the keyboard, or the hotkeys, which is a different way than the keyboard, the arrows, use the mouse. You can use a toolbar, which you can also access with the keyboard and the mouse. You can use shortcut keys, you can use an API, you can use accessibility APIs. Wouldn't it be great if we could write a test once and have the framework automatically explore all of these things? And wouldn't it be great if we could extend that even further and start talking about in terms of, I want a page with stuff on it. And know that that's what the test cares about, just that it has stuff, that it doesn't care what kind of stuff. And we can automatically explore a data space of different kinds of stuff in different places and different relationships on the page. This template test case I didn't exactly set out initially to go do. But this is what's evolved for me as the most important part of the framework. And one of the things that I saw happen in the culture of the team over time that completely surprised me was that this changed from being a way that the test team thought about our test automation framework to affecting and transforming the way that the entire product team thought about our product. Because what happened was, testers started thinking about not the low-level details of, well, how do I verify that when I do this widget, the right stuff happens in the UI? Instead, testers started thinking about, what is the customer trying to do? What are the customer actions here? The low level up to the high levels. And then the testers started asking these questions in the feature team meetings. So, for example, there might be a spec review, and instead of getting bogged down in verifying all the little details that Kim is talking about how this little widget works, testers started asking about, well, what's the point of this widget or this feature? And that transformation amazed me because it took the team from a stronger focus on the customer to really embedding the thought of the customer throughout the entire test framework and the team culture. And I've seen this happen over and over again with team after team as I work with them on building test automation systems in this way. When I work with teams to do this, we always have a product that the team is working on, and so we can use that as discussion points as we figure out, well, what are the customer actions? What is the connection that the customer is trying to do? And then build the test framework and the lexicon, the ways that we talk about the product and the customer model. Here we can't do that since we all work on different teams. So what I'm going to use tonight is a media player. Whether that's your iDevice or a Windows device or a record player. Think about your favorite media device. Now think about if you had one test you could run to say, what's the quality of this product? What would that test be? One test. So another way to say this is, what test gives you the most information about the state of the product?
Yeah. Does it do what I want it to do? Does it actually play my song?
Okay.
The better test though is to stop playing your song.
I don't want it to stop. If it can't even start, I don't want it to stop.
Well, then it fails before it even starts. It turns on.
I just have a right answer here, obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I see what you're saying. Stop implies that part of the song already.
It's a I think you have to get something to play before you can play it though. Like, does it populate? So whether you're talking about a list of music or I was thinking like Hulu.
Well, I like what she has though about the stop though, because if it doesn't stop, that implies that 1 is turned on, 2 you're able to select what you wanted, 3 you're able to start it going on. So now if you can stop it, then you've already met all those prerequisites.
It's indirect versus direct testing.
Right.
Okay.
You're just lumping a bunch of assumptions all into
That is true, but if those assumptions, if none of any of those assumptions don't work, then you know your product's no good. If you can't stop your song because it never played, you can't go.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, how can I turn it on in different environments? Meaning, like, can I turn it on in the dark? Can I turn it on anywhere? Because for me, that's a concern because I might want to play it at night. And I want to know that I can turn it on, scroll it, turn it off. And then how long will it play for before the battery?
Does it do any good to turn it on at night if it doesn't play songs?
All of these
totally
are turned on in the
turned
first place.
Yes.
Power up.
But if it didn't, it failed. If it fails at any of those assumptions, you can't do the NB.
What time it would be?
Yeah.
If you only have one.
Yeah, the limitation is only one.
Yeah.
How about, does it play the song of my choosing in its entirety? Okay, one test case.
So the techniques I found to be really useful in framing these questions and actually can be used to build almost every test case when the framework can explore all the paths of behaviors that are underneath this, is to write it something like a use case. So one example where we say, as a type of customer, or as a noun, I can do the action so that I get the result. So how would we rewrite this? Does it play my song in its entirety in that format? How would we rewrite this test case? Does it play the song I chose in the entirety in this format of as a type of customer? I can do this action so that I achieve some desired result.
When I hit play, the song plays all the way through.
So as a listener, I can play a whole song so that
It's like repeating.
I'm missing bits and
It's like
pieces.
repeating. It's
Yeah,
a
it is
behavior-driven
behavior-driven.
design.
But where are you when you're playing? That's also.
Yeah, that's true.
So we know we want to play the song, what's the end result? What, so I can what? So I can-
As a user, I'm assuming it, I'm enjoying it. That's why we're
Right,
saying
yeah, yeah, I should be happy with the end.
So what kind of customer? Or what is there?
That's passenger market.
As a person with no thumbs.
Wow.
As a music lover.
Yeah.
Well,
Retail and
you shouldn't necessarily have to be though. As anybody. As a child.
So are any of you wondering why these details matter?
It's
Listener was probably important because ultimately if you can't hear it, the rest of it is pointless.
It's
Do you
the
have
perspective of the
phones?
user.
Are you going to use
It's
voice
the
to kick it off? I mean, who the user is and what kind of controls make sense really do depend on the user.
Yeah, that's part of it. And what were you saying?
I was just saying that it's the perspective of the user because it's a user story, so you would want to know what the user wants.
Yeah, that's part of it. And another part is that what I found is when teams start thinking about the testing they do in these terms, you start getting into all sorts of interesting questions that of things like, well, who exactly is our customer? Every team I've ever worked with always thinks that they have a good definition of a customer. And oftentimes what finds out that when you start asking questions,
articulate it.
in this kind of a context, then where we have to start understanding, well, where am I playing this thing? Am I at home? Am I in the car? Am I outside where there's a lot of noise? Who am I? Am I a child? Am I an adult? Am I someone with some sort of handicap? Am I a brand new user? Am I an experienced user? There's all sorts of ramifications. If I'm a brand new user or a casual user, the way I want to work, interface with my music library, I may not even have a music library, where I just play whatever songs it finds by default on my computer. Whereas if I'm an audiophile or someone with a ginormous music library, I probably want a lot more control, and I have to want to be able to tell it certain places to look for and ignore certain kinds of music. This also starts getting into telling us the parts of the things that are likely to change. So if we're asking the question about, well, who is our customer, then either we decide, well, we have one customer, and it doesn't really matter how much music they have, our music player doesn't react differently to it. Or we decide we have these kind of specific customers. And a lot of times we have that information already, where if we don't, then maybe marketing is selling our products to these particular segments of customers, or there's someone that's been doing research and we understand all these things. But we also get into the questions, some of what we were saying earlier, of if we talk about in its entirety, then we're hearing all the things about we can stop playing, we can hear it all the way through. It stops on its own when it's supposed to without extreme noise or something like that. We also start getting into questions like, well, where does the song come from? How does the system know about my song? Am I dragging and dropping it on? Is it automatically finding on my hard drive? Is it streaming in? Am I buying it from somewhere? How do I get that? And so again, there's the questions about, well, which of these things do we need to deal with right now? Which things do we think are likely to change? Which things do we think are unlikely to change? And some of these, I can't tell you how many times when I work with teams who think they have done all the research and they know all this information. And we start asking some of these questions and quote obvious questions like, well, I don't know. Where does our library start getting asked? And it happens with not just the testers, the devs and the PMs and the entire engineering team, the entire product team start thinking this way. And earlier we said, when we talked about the end result, you said, well, we're doing this so that we're happy. How do we verify happiness?
You measure endorphins.
You can move on to measure endorphins, yeah. And then how do we do that in our test system? Is it measuring endorphins? Is it looking how many times they come back and launch, how many more songs they play, how often? Getting all these questions are important for the testing so that we can figure out, well, how do we validate these things? They're also important for the product. How do we get this telemetry? What kind of validation do we want to do after we ship on actual stuff in the field? It's coming in, yeah.
Isn't that stuff already kind of figured out in design? Because they want to know that they can fulfill a need and notice how people are already behaving with existing products.
It may be.
And then borrowing that information for test as well.
So So you want to, the no thumbs question was interesting because I'm driving. I don't want to take my hands off the wheel. I shouldn't have to, but how are most people doing it? They are taking their hands off the wheel. So, and I mean, I do start to, I want to listen to a song. I don't know, am I going to buy it? Is there a try before you buy kind of thing? I think listening to it at volume 0 is probably not going to be really meaningful. So when you started playing all the way to the end at volume 0, well, it worked just fine. You just couldn't hear it. So the whole happiness experience, I'm like, I don't know how to close the loop on that. Without.
Yeah, and this is becoming more and more important because as
if you pick the wrong song, it's not going to help.
If it's 0, you might still be happy you didn't have to hear it.
Yeah, true.
in a lot of products now, the only real differentiation between product A and product B is that product A makes a certain set of people happy, and they hate product B, and vice versa.
Do I hear Android Apple?
For example.
Well, if you get too happy, maybe it should pull the car over.
Perhaps. So sometimes we have this data already, sometimes not. I'll almost guarantee you that no one has put serious thought into how do we measure happiness, whatever it means in your particular context, or sadness, or whatever the emotion is that you're trying to engender with this feature or the product. Some features, you just want kind of boredom. You want people to use it and be done. Tax software, I can think of probably 3 or 4 different emotions that I would hope they're trying to cause, and then what they're actually causing. And they probably not thought explicitly about any of this. I've definitely worked with teams who know everything that they want the customer to be able to do. They don't really understand why they want the customer to be able to do that. They definitely don't understand how they want the customer to feel. I think someone will say, well, they should feel happy. And someone else says, well, why? This is, whatever, hard drive backup. Why do they want to be happy?
Because they don't want to be sad when they lose everything.
Exactly. So it gets into the discussion and it starts uncovering, like, what's the point of the product? And this helps us focus our testing. Because if we know the point of the product is not it's not necessarily backing up every single thing on your hard drive. It's backing up the most important memories. That lets us think about, well, so what data types are most important? Maybe not the Excel spreadsheets, maybe photos and videos are more important. Make sure that we nail that and everything else kind of comes along for the ride, we hope. And there's some weird data format that doesn't work, we aren't going to worry about that. It helps us focus on the data we use, it helps us focus the entire testing. So sort of applying this to the features across the product. Some of these are more important than others. By understanding what we want, how we want the customer to feel, that can help us understand which of these features are most important to work and how well do they each need to work. So it can help us kind of figure out what the bar is for quality and bugs that need to get fixed.
Can I ask you a question on that last point? So I'm gonna rattle the cage a little bit here. On one hand, I completely agree with what you're saying, that we should understand the customer, the business value, the expectation, right? But as a technical team, and we're partnering with business users and a business department, stakeholders that have an expectation. Do you sometimes find that that kind of approach from the technical team might chew into efficiencies or momentum where maybe we gotta have that trust relationship saying, listen, we gotta have a rapport with the business users, with that arm of the business, you do your job, let's work in collaboration towards IT enabling the business on what they believe needs to happen for the ideal customer experience, right? So how far is too far from the technical end, trying to understand what the final customer solution looks like versus just taking orders from our business partners on what they feel and what the stakeholders sign off for a successful product is going to be. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think are you saying what happens how do you keep marketing from saying you're taking over their job?
Basically, right.
Yeah.
How far is too far from that approach, trying to understand and test versus, okay, whatever definition they come up with, that's what we're going to align to, because ultimately they're assigning acceptance. You know, we're all working together toward the better customer experience, but have you run into that before where sometimes it takes a little longer because everyone's trying to figure out what the right answer is for the big picture?
Yeah, I don't think there's a particular line. It always depends on context.
Right.
However, a lot of it comes from your intent. There's a line that sometimes gets crossed between I'm really trying to understand versus I'm trying to make decisions or I'm trying to drive the business in a certain way. As long as the engineering team keeps the intent of I'm trying to understand what's going on, then I found anyone that you go and ask questions with is more than happy to spend copious amounts of time with you, helping you understand and answering questions. It's when you start trying to take over their job that they start getting antsy. So, in that, it's kind of ways that you ask questions and how you formulate questions and kind of talk. But a lot of it really just ends up being the relationship that you build with those people and what your intent really is. Because you can ask questions in the most inane and clumsy way, and if that marketing or whatever you're talking to the person knows that you're really trying to understand, that comes through. And it doesn't matter how smooth talker you are, if what you're really trying to do is change the marketing plan in the way that you think is right, that marketing person is totally going to see that.
But I wonder, why should it wait till task to get these things worked out? Because it should have already been worked out before it even goes to task.
Yes.
But you're putting test at the end.
Well, when is test involved with actually doing the market research? It's like, they should be, but that's.
In my situation, we review product requirements before they get turned into software requirements.
Yes.
Right? So that's the place to inject test.
But you're going to have that team that you're now starting to develop and explore these usability ideas with at that stage.
Sure. And an ideal world, definitely all these things should be thought about upfront. If you're in an environment where test is at the back or not fully integrated in with everything else going on, then it may be that this work has happened already when you start asking these questions. People have answers that make sense, and as hard as of all the angles you think to ask and attack on that, they have all the answers. Great. That helps you prioritize. When you find questions that they don't have answers to, then interesting things start to happen. Those people start saying, wow, interesting questions over here from this tester person that I thought just whatever their perception of tester is. I'm going to start including them sooner.
Yes.
the entire team starts thinking about some of these things where they might not have before, or at least certain people on the team. So sometimes you have this sort of cadre of people from across the disciplines who think about this stuff. And so they get together and start thinking through this, even if everyone else is going on there oblivious to it. Any of these things start making the product better, start making the team work together better. And over time, if this sustains, the people asking these questions maintain their interest, then the entire culture of the team starts to shift. And over time, if this continues long enough and people care about it enough, then test starts to be not spicy. You'll see this happen. So how this translates into actual test scripts starts with the terminology. For example, talking about the customer. What words do you use for the customer? Do you talk about a newbie versus experienced? Is it a new customer, newbie, inexperienced? Each of those have different connotations. Each of those kind of color your perception of the customer. That's kind of a simple case. There are more complex cases where Team A and Team B are talking about the exact same customer using different terminology because they have their different perspectives. There's the database team, and there's the front-end team, and there's the services team. They're all talking about this customer who just signed up, and they're all using different terms. And when they talk to each other, crosstalk starts happening. So the terminology helps. And for the test framework, then the terminology just starts embedding into the test framework. And that both reinforces the team's understanding of what these terms mean. It also helps onboarding as new testers come on, or when a tester takes on a new area, because they know what all these terms mean. Or there's a dictionary or some, where they can go and look up what these terms mean. We also get consistency across our use cases. And whether it's a manual script that someone's typing in or test automation, the same thing means the same thing across everything. Is that also making sense so far?
I'm a little confused. That last statement, are you saying that the test scripts or automated or manual should be written in terms of the specific user? Because see, the way I look at it is you start with your use case, you look at what the specific user is, and then when you go to write your test, you translate that into the steps that user would do. So once you get into your test script, it doesn't matter what user you're coming from, it's just the user helps you translate a particular scenario into a particular set of steps.
That depends. Some scenarios, well, it depends on a lot of things. In some cases, it makes sense to write your scripts at a user-specific level or some other variable level. In other cases, you want a more generic thing. Which doesn't seem like a very satisfying.
I guess the way I look at it is, I mean, if I wrote a test script that says, as a beginning user, you select the song to play, doesn't tell me what to do. I mean, everyone can have a different interpretation of that versus an experienced user. But however, if you take the test case, the scenario where a beginning user wants to play a song, you then translate that into the steps of, follow the most explicit menu path. Whereas if you're following the scenario of an experienced user playing a song, you might say use the shortcut key. But telling me in the test script itself that you're an advanced user or experienced or a new user doesn't actually get me where I want to be.
That, I think, depends on what the team has decided is important.
Well, there were interesting things in his question, too,
Yeah.
that depending on the user, depending on the platform, depending on maybe just on preferences, how you use something, you know, you might have all of the menu bar, the shortcuts, and so on. I half wonder if sometimes there are elements of abstraction that you associate either with the user or the platform separate from pick the song and make it play. You know, because on one phone, certain buttons might be involved. On another phone, you may do the whole thing with voice. And being very specific about the controls means lots of test cases instead of just maybe focusing on the user or platform or that there are elements that might come from the platform and the user. And
yeah. And even with a team, we want different tests at different levels. So, and this was the case on the million teams that I work with. That sometimes we want to test the most generic test possible. One of our customers can play the song in its entirety in the field and have all the different types of customers automatically explored in that, all the different ways to play the music automatically explored in that, all the different ways to other times we want a very specific thing. Maybe we're regressing a bug that happened when a newbie customer did this versus an advanced customer. So we want to know that we're working with a newbie customer. And this is one of the things that the test framework, being able to explore all these options and knowing these hierarchies, can help with. But if we know we have customers that we have and experienced. And if we know that newbie can play, or not even can, maybe generally does what we expect to play through UI, and the experienced will play through sometimes the UI in expert mode, sometimes using a shortcut key, then we can start doing a couple things with our test. We can say, we can write the test of a customer can play the song in its entirety. And as the test executes, or as a tester is evaluating that manual script and deciding how to explore that, we say, well, I've been doing a lot of newbie, acting as a newbie a lot, I'm going to act as an experienced person this time. Or the test framework can automatically explore both of those. And it can know, well, I'm a newbie customer, so I'm going to play through the UI most of the time. Some small amount of the time, I'm going to play through an expert mode because people get there by accident. And if I'm an experienced customer, I'm going to play through the expert UI a lot of the time. And some of the time, I'll go through a shortcut. And we can also write a test that's talking specifically about play. In this case, we don't have that context for the customer. And so it says, well, this time I'm going to play through the basic UI, and next time I'm going to play through the expert UI. And the time after that, I'm going to play through the shortcut key and all the other options we have. So we can have the basic test, like you were talking about. We can have more specific tests, looking at the different paths. We can have a generic test, looking at a different path. And the intent of each of these is clear. If my test talks about a newbie customer, and we know that that test cares that it's going through that newbie path for some reason. If the test isn't talking about customers and it's only talking about playing, we know that what type of customer isn't important for this test, but rather the act of playing is. So that so now that we get, say there's another way for newbie customers to play, or we're doing some sort of transition path to help newbie customers become more experienced in the way of playing. It becomes really clear what tests we need to go and update. And actually, if we're in the test automation system, this new part can just come along on its own, so that all the tests that are going through talking about newbie customers can start exercising this path automatically on their own. We don't have to write additional test cases for that. All the tests that are talking with the experienced customer, they ignore that. All the tests that are talking about play specifically outside of the context of a specific customer, they all start exercising this path some of the time. So we can, and we saw this on the first two that I worked on, where part of the UI was a timeline. They had keyframes that defined when certain things happened. For 98% of the product cycle, we had one way to set those keyframes. We had a lot of tests written on those. And then very late in the product cycle, we wanted to add a new way to set keyframes that we thought would add a lot of value for the customer. However, it was also pretty risky. And the dev work was a reasonable amount of time. And we looked at the test work. We said, well, you know, that's going to take about an hour. And everyone sort of blinked. Like, really? And we said, yeah, because all we have to do is write a new behavior for this new way to set keyframes and run all our existing tests. That gave us the confidence to go ahead and make the change. And dev checked in within an hour. The test rig had the new behavior for that new way to set the keyframe checked in. Had run all the existing tests, both against the old way of running, setting keyframes, the new way of setting keyframes, and swapping back and forth, and found a bunch of bugs that got fixed right away, while the developers still understood all the reasons that they do the choices they had. Does that answer your question?
I think so.
Okay. Yeah.
So if you were talking about, so we're talking about customers, and we have newbie, and we have experienced, and we're talking about playing, would you describe an experienced user maybe as inheriting from a customer, if this were written as a programmed test?
Maybe. For questions like that, I've seen success in doing some sort of inheritance chain. I've also seen success in using something like an enumeration, where it's sort of metadata that comes along, not an object with data attached. Those are two that I remember off the top of my head. I'm sure there are several other ways that can be done. And any of those, there's not a right or wrong answer generally. It's what makes most sense for you. There's one team where we argued a lot, actually, early on, about the implementation of the automation stack, automation framework for, is this a static set of functions in nested class hierarchy that we pass the objects in that we're acting on? So in this case, would we pass a customer into the play object and it would know how to play differently for newbie or experienced customer? Or do we have these objects with the true real object orientation, where we have a newbie customer and it has a play object, a play method, and we have experienced customer and it has a play method, following this hierarchy down for an entire graphical editor. And there are a lot of reasons to do one way or the other. In that particular team, we decided to go the static route because we realized most of the testing that the team wanted to do was through the UI. And in the UI, there was only ever one active thing at a time. So having 4 different document objects kind of active at the same time raised a lot of questions about what should happen if you say document A.add shape and document B.add shape. Do we actually change those, change the active document on the screen? If you're not active, do you then add through the API? There started to be a lot of questions and a lot of inconsistencies. And more, it was, well, a custom model is there's one active thing at a time. There might be multiple documents going on, but only one is active. So it made the most sense in trying to model the way that the customer is thinking about the product, embedding that in the test framework, to say, well, there's an active document. Switch documents to make another one active. There's always an active document. So add shape just always worked on the active document, regardless of how many there were.
Just 5 minutes.
Okay.
I have a question. So I'm a little confused. Are you saying that we should write test scripts based on the user, or just write test scripts based on any kind of user?
Yes. Well, it depends on the context, and this is why those discussions about what's important are so important. So if in your context, the difference, the distinction between the different kind of customers are important, then probably you want at least some of your tests written about in terms of that customer. Some of your tests, if there's no distinction between different customers, or if the distinction between your customers don't matter, then you don't need to write in terms of the customer. Think about what's important for that test, and what the intent of that test is to validate, and then make those the focus of that test.
Right, like according to me, I think you should have test cases based on any kind of a customer, because like for example, Alt-F4, everyone knows what, like people who are well versed with computer knows what Alt-F4 does. But if you have a screen with just a cancel button, a button saying cancel, which actually exits, and a cross on top, if you click either, it'll exit. But if I'm an experienced customer and I know that Alt-F4 should also exit, and if someone has not tested for that, it won't. So, I mean, I'm just saying that I think you should have test cases covering all of that, and not just based on a customer.
You should have a full suite of test cases, but those scenarios aren't necessarily from zero. So if you're testing from a new perspective, then your probably should have cases like click the cancel button, or the yes, and the rest of it would be a part of the 2 case.
Right, you can prioritize your test cases, but you should have all, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think if there's an execution path, like, you may have execution paths that you don't really care about testing. But if there's a path that matters, you want that to be tested, and you want that to be hooked into your test framework and your lexicon in some way.
So I mean, I want to poke at this a little bit more. Is what you're saying as a possibility to, taking this example, you have a test case which is close the application, right? And and basically the step is, you know, initiate the close, verify the application goes away.
Yes.
But then into that test case, you pass in which type of user you are, And so the test case is aware of user types. And so if you pass in newbie user, it's going to hit the cancel button. If you pass in experienced user, it's going to hit Alt F4. And so you have one test case, but you have 2 different ways to run it.
Exactly.
But then you have to build into it, and you have to build in the smarts of how each user interfaces with the application, which is not a small task.
It's not a small task. It doesn't have to be a complex task, though. One of the things that we've done on some teams is we have this hierarchy of creating projects. I can do that using the mouse. I can do that using the keyboard. That I can do with the arrow keys or with the shortcut keys to show up on you. I can also do that with the hotkey. Do that using the toolbar. You're using a mouse. And we set up a hierarchy so that Create New Project knows that its child behaviors are using the menus and using the toolbar, and each of those have using keyboard and using mouse, children, and so on. And then each of the children can have a way to say, I'm enabled right now, or I'm not. And one of the flags that I can look at is, well, what kind of customer am I working on? And so, creating a project using keyboard, using hotkey, can know I'm only enabled if the customer is, if I'm an experienced customer. And we could throw in another random thing that says, well, 1 out of 100 times, if I'm a newbie customer, I'm going to run 2, because they find it by accident. So we can build in the smarts in a very localized way so that each of these options knows the states that it's enabled in, while the system can automatically explore each of those and only look at the states that are enabled at that time, without it needing to be complicated. I've seen that sort of selection mechanism that can be implemented for something basic, 10 or 12 lines of code. It doesn't have to be complicated. Yeah.
So obviously you're talking about doing a lot of this as automation, and I know you're saying it can be either way, but in my experience, any scripting of certain things tends to focus the attention either of, obviously the program's attention is inherently focused on what you told it to focus on. And a human, if you tell it what to watch for, that's what they'll watch for. How do you deal with, the classic example that seems to come up a lot in modern, touch-based UIs of, say, jerky animation, something that's very hard to specify in a programmatic way. Well, watch the animation. Is it jerky? How do you tell the computer to do that? And if you've got someone reading the script, they very likely don't see that the animation is jerky unless it's exceptions to jerky. What do you do to deal with things like that when you're focusing on this sort of testing?
So for manual scripts, well, they both start with a discussion of how much jerkiness matters to us, and how do we measure that?
Well, I didn't specify that well enough. So if you're in a case where everybody's experienced with the platform, maybe we all know by now jerky animation is important, but let's say you're writing the first mobile app or the first app on a new platform, and you've never run into the problem of jerky animation, but the first end user that uses it will go, "Oh, this looks terrible." So if you script, it's hard to detect because you don't know. It's something you don't know you need to script for.
Wouldn't that be something called your growth test if you're catching frames per second?
Maybe.
Would it be? If you're doing perf testing and measuring frames per second, would you catch slow animations?
Yeah, if you're, well, so I think there's a couple of questions here. One is, how do we notice things that we tend to not notice? And that, there are any number of ways. One thing that I've seen a lot of success with that is decreeing, like today is jerky animation day. On top of everything else that you're doing, all you product team, keep an eye out for jerky animation. Checklists sometimes work well, so that as I'm going through my testing, if I'm doing some manual testing, as I periodically remember to look and see, oh, have I been looking for jerky animation? Have I been looking for whatever the other issue should be? On the test automation side, then that starts getting into gory technical details of how much do you care and how often, and how deep into the rendering pipeline can you get. Does that answer your question?
Somewhat. You seem to keep going back to checklists and things, which imply that you figured out that you have to be watching for this.
At that point, I'd say you have to go to your test team. If your test team isn't a thinking test team and realizes and looking at all that, I mean,
that's more or less what I'm asking is if you're at what point, I guess at some point you need eyeballs on the product.
Depending on the product.
If the product is used by eyeballs, you need eyeballs on the product.
Yeah, that's actually what I was going to ask. At the beginning of your talk, you said that your business owner asked for 100% automation. How close did you actually get to that? Like, did you find that manual was still necessary?
I find manual is always necessary. And it just happens. It has to happen. I've never seen anyone able to write an automated test script that's not doing manual testing as they're writing that. Because they have to figure out, well, what are the steps I need to do? And even if you have a nice framework that has all this hierarchy of things so you don't have to know the details, how many different ways can I create a new project and which one am I going to pick now? Someone has to think about it and say, well, so for our, I'm playing music in its entirety so I feel happy. What stuff do I need to do in there? And how detailed, what level of detail do I want this test to be? Do I want it to be very high level? Do I want it low level for some reason? Someone still has to look at that and figure out the steps. And hopefully they're going to run it at least once on their machine before they check it in and see that it's doing something that seems reasonable, that the results it's logging out seem reasonable. So there's manual testing going on all the time. I've never seen a team that could only does automated testing. I don't know how to do that.
That's true. Great presentation. I'm sorry to interject. So sounds like a lively discussion, a lot of good conversation going on. And so what we usually do is, depending on your schedule or anybody else's, there's a coffee shop just a block down the street called Zoka. There's the Round Bar and Grill. This is just a block down here. So depending on what you want to do, and if anybody else wants to continue all the questions and answers and everything else, we'll just segue over to that. We do have to wrap up. We have a couple of door prizes tonight. The traditional presenter is the honorary. We have a female shirt and a man shirt donated by PNSQC, which is the festival down in Portland. So here's the female pile. And the winner is
Elizabeth Collar.
Ah.
There you go. And from the guys group.
Roy Coons.
Hey. I'm sorry? Hey, nice. That same shit? No. Yeah.
The James Bond look and then different.
So thanks everybody for coming. I hate to cut it short, but anyway, just want to make sure everybody's schedule stays on track. Thank you again for being part of this community and contributing to the conversation and everything else. Hopefully we can continue some other things. Up to you, Doug.
Yeah, I can stick around for a little while.
Well,
Also,
yeah.
if you go to my website, thebradytester.com, which is linked on the invite.
No, it's badly linked. I don't know
Well,
what happened, but if you copy and paste, it works.
I have several presentations that go at a high level to you some of the deep technical details on one particular implementation.
Awesome. And I liked the style. It was really different than what we've usually done, and it was very interactive. Yeah. Good. Thanks for coming.